Good morning. My name is Jérôme Delay. I'm the head of the entertainment division for WinMedem. Welcome to MIPTV. This keynote is all about the future of storytelling. Today we have with us the visionary team behind one of the most innovative and original piece of content now being made. I'm talking about The Limit. The Limit extends the boundaries of how stories are told. It also expands the definition of what constitutes the content industry of today and tomorrow. The Limit is written, directed, and produced by hit filmmaker Robert Rodriguez. It is a production from STX Surreal, the new VR unit of STX Entertainment. The series will debut on the company's Paper Experience channel, Surreal, launched as an app on VR headset mid-2018. The show provides an ideal vehicle for today's discussion about where storytelling is going. Joining Robert Rodriguez on the panel are Andy Vick and Rick Vey, co-presidents of STX Surreal, and Racer Rodriguez, who co-wrote the series with his father, Robert. The moderator for the session is Peter Wright, who is co-editor of international news for Deadline.com. Thanks, Peter, and thanks to Robert, Andy, Rick, and Racer. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming first Andy Vick and Rick Vey.
Hi guys, how you doing? Good to see you. Before we have our two special guests come out, Rick and I are going to spend a little bit of time, a couple minutes, talking about what we do at a high level and how we're approaching the space. So Rick and I oversee all aspects of STX's virtual reality business, from a creative development standpoint, from a production standpoint, from a distribution standpoint, and from monetization. For those of you who aren't familiar with our studio, STX is a global media company, produces film, television, digital series, and of course VR. You may be familiar with some of our films up here. We're behind the Bad Moms franchise, Jackie Chan's The Foreigner, and most recently the Oscar-nominated Molly's Game.
So we're excited to be here today to talk to you guys about what we think is the next evolution of VR entertainment. So why listen to us? Over the past 5 years, we've produced over 100 VR video experiences with tens of millions of views on major platforms, and we've worked hand in hand with leaders in the space like Google and Facebook to help them test and launch new VR products. And for us, the big question to be answered is, despite the billions of dollars invested in the technology behind VR, and despite massive enthusiasm from early adopters, why hasn't the medium yet broken through? We think it's a content problem.
So STX is in the business of creating hit programming that's seen by massive audiences. And our approach in VR is no different. We're injecting the same DNA that successful film and television businesses have been doing for decades. These core elements are ubiquitous across every territory, every language, and every platform. Things like A-list stars, visionary filmmakers, top-tier production value, and accessibility. And surprisingly, no one has put all of these pieces together in a coherent strategy. And that's what Rick and I have been doing over the past 18 months.
And so, no doubt there's a lot of barriers standing in the way of making breakout VR content, both on the consumer side and on the content creator side. And so we're addressing a lot of these problems head on. So creatively, our programming approach is broader, and it targets a more mainstream millennial and Gen X audience that loves scripted stories in genres like action, sci-fi, comedy, and horror. We're also looking at how people are consuming VR content. And it's trending in a big way towards mobile VR, where half the time spent is watching video. And we're also developing new production tools that are user-friendly. so world-class filmmakers like Robert Rodriguez can jump in and translate their skill set without losing sight of essential elements like story, character, and performance.
So to that end, we've developed a new cinematic VR format that sits in between 360-degree video and traditional widescreen video. You know, we've produced content, 360 content, for nearly 5 years now, and we're really sort of aware of the limitations, right? So we know 360 is great for experiential. Of course, a big win in the space is documentary as well. But when it comes to scripted narrative, it really leads to a frustrating experience for our audience. They don't know where to look, right? And for our filmmakers who are used to having a frame and a camera to whip around, we've sort of taken that away from them as well. And I think what Rick and I realized is that people really want a comfortable, lean-back VR experience that they can have on their couch in their living room.
So this is an early prototype of our virtual viewing environment that illustrates what we're talking about. So we've cropped in on the 360 sphere, and we've defined a massive dome-like screen that's kind of like IMAX on steroids. It's wider than 180 degrees, so viewers can be seated comfortably and look left, right, and all around without breaking the immersion. And because this is already more directed than 360, it lends itself to a 16:9 remastering process that lets us redistribute content on more traditional video platforms.
So the root at what we're getting here is that our new format, our talent-driven approach, it's really an iteration on a process that's been evolving over the past 100+ years of filmmaking. And I think it's important to talk about that we're not reinventing storytelling from the ground up. We're just adding a new step on this timeline.
And so this summer, we'll launch our slate of premium star-driven VR projects, starting with The Limit from writer-director Robert Rodriguez.
Hello.
Good morning.
So, Robert, we just saw that. Fantastic. How did you get involved? How did this come about, and what made you want to get into VR?
You know, I've been making movies now over 25 years, and one of my favorite and one of our most lasting family films was called Shark Boy and Lava Girl that Racer came up with when he was seven years old. So we'd worked together over the years, and he was getting more and more into like graphic novels, drawing, telling stories, and asked him, you know, a few years ago, would he be interested in getting into film storytelling? And he said, no, I'd like to do VR storytelling. I was like, VR, really? I guess that's what the kids are into. Well, let's start a company together and start making some VR projects so I can figure out what that is, because I wanted to learn. For him to be that compelled with it and choosing that over traditional storytelling, I thought that there must be something there, and I wasn't well versed in it. And usually when I'm not well versed in something, the best thing to do is attack it, go into it, make something, and you'll figure it out. So when we started a company, we said, let's just start taking meetings with people who are producing this content, and that way we can kind of figure it out, see what it's lacking, or see where it's going, and try and push in that direction. So that's sort of just immersing ourselves in it was the approach. And I was working with STX on something else, and they said, we have a VR company we just acquired called Surreal. We'd love for you to meet these guys about maybe doing something for a movie VR. And I was thinking just separately, VR just in general. I said, send them down to my studio in Austin. Rick and Andy came down, and they said something that just really resonated with me. They said, look, people are always waiting for the next generation of VR before they get into it, and we think you could do something really incredible with what the tools are now. And there's just not enough content, and there's 10 to 15 million headsets out there, and you could do something really innovative right now. And that just spoke to me, because that's just been my whole career. I mean, I started shooting digital before anyone was shooting digital to figure out what that was. I made the first digital 3D movie before there were enough digital screens to even show it on. There were only like 3 digital screens in all the United States when I made Spy Kids 3D, the first digital movie. I kind of found that if you got in as an early adopter to figure out a new technology, it helped propel everyone into the future a lot faster because you started figuring it out. People could see what you were doing and get inspired by that technology. So that's what kind of got us into it. And so they said cinematic VR in like a not a 360 viewing, but like less than that. We think that you could do something really neat with that, and you could still have your regular filmmaking support team. So we started looking at that. We looked at different VR, cinematic VR that had existed already, and could immediately see kind of what the problem was. You kind of would put on the headset, watch it, and you actually felt less engaged, not more engaged. So we thought, how can we take the limitations of what VR has already in its current medium and make that a plus and write a story and craft a character? Because that's something we do. We can create a franchise, create original characters. Let's write something for, I was working with Michelle Rodriguez we're working on Battle Angel, Alita Battle Angel. And I said, hey, you should get into VR with us. It'd be really badass. Like two Hispanic filmmakers like making VR futuristic filmmaking together. She's like, I'm down, I'm into it. So she came up with some ideas too, and we came up with this thing and thought this would be a cool way to make something where you felt like you were inside of a motion picture. Have the ability to look around, but actually be a character alongside with her, jumping out of an airplane, going through urban warfare, going through an action film basically, but being inside and take the things that usually when you do like POV in a movie that may not work as well in a movie, works really well in VR. I mean, you really feel like you're there and you are in there with her. And it felt more, I thought it could feel more engaging than what you had seen before, so that was the approach.
So Racer, tell me, how did you get into it and how did you manage to persuade your dad? You know, talk us through what got you interested in the first place.
How I got interested in VR?
Yeah.
Yes. I've always been passionate and loved the interactive storytelling of video games. And so when I started discovering VR, I realized that it has such high level of potential for that interactive storytelling that not only I love, or interactive and immersive storytelling, but that a lot of people love. So,
what sort of games were you? Any references that?
Any references? Mostly, I love role-playing games with grand stories that you play as a character of the story and get to be in the story and be alongside characters. Those are the kinds of those immersive stories that I really liked. So, when it came time to do The Limit, this felt like a great way to create a story like that. To
take some of that and take it into the film world.
For sure.
Yeah. And so talk about how The Limit came about in terms of the story, and we'll talk about the process secondly.
I thought that would be really part of the wish fulfillment of you put a headset on, you expect to be really engaged in a story. And I found that a lot of cinematic VR was you were sitting and observing things happening. And when you had that much freedom of movement, it's almost like having a very distracted audience member who's watching you on a stage. Everyone in the audience now can kind of look around and look everywhere else and look at everything but us. So you feel like a little bit less engaged because you're back there. But if you were right here, you would suddenly be more engaged. So I'd be going, we're going to jump out of a plane right now. So I thought, let's put it the POV aspect, which there were already a lot of rules the guys told me about. Well, people don't usually do POV because you can't really whip pan, you can't really do any cuts within the frame. There were a lot of can'ts already, and that always gets me really excited because that makes me realize people don't really know what's possible or not because not enough people have messed with it. Maybe if we can go in and figure out a way to do all of these things that are usually the things you're not supposed to do, we'll come up with something that no one else has done. So let's take the audience and make them actually a character and an important character of the story, because you're in the wish fulfillment of not only being in an action film with Michelle, but she's even looking at you like you are someone really important to the story, and you're going to be much more engaged. And we took the limitations of what the medium had and made it a story point. So it's actually should be a little disorienting because you're supposed to be disoriented as a character. So it actually makes you more involved in the story, not less involved. So kind of taking, and I always do that in anything else that I've taken on, whether it was digital or green screen or digital 3D, it was what were the limitations and make that actually part of the story so it becomes additive and not subtractive. So that's kind of how we wrote it around. We wrote it around that concept and then just kind of just made it as exciting as possible.
And that was one of the big learning processes for us, was really going into it and thinking about doing a POV, a big POV action experience. I think it was a little bit overwhelming at first, because certainly nothing at that scale had ever been done before. And so, of course, running through our minds was just all of the hurdles and like, how are we going to pull this off? And I think, you know, being able to work with Robert and Racer to like realize that the truth is, you know, all the things that were hanging us up, all the technical things, were really just barriers that we had to just break through. And I think what we ended up finding out was that, like, there's a way to, you know, not be so strict about every shot. Is like have moments where it can be a little bit more objective, and sort of find that blend of POV and objective, where for the viewer you still get the POV experience, but for the filmmaker, you know, it just gives us so much more creative flexibility.
Yeah, there's a lot of trust in the process. And I remember when you guys came up and showed us the first rough cut before there were any special effects, and I sat there, I watched it, I took the headset off, and I go, well, you made a Robert Rodriguez film. And that's exactly what we wanted to do. I think that was the point. And so it was this self-fulfilling prophecy of trusting these guys to do what they always do, to bend the rules, to do things, you know, like, why ask the question, just go and do it. And I think, you know, they really delivered on it.
You know, the best thing was just to start, because, you know, you as a filmmaker, you kind of know when you do a chase scene, a car that's speeding towards you, you kind of know it's going to be back there somewhere. I couldn't tell anybody how any of the staging would be till we actually got on the set. So the VR helmet, it's a really wide lens, basically. So I wouldn't know how close the car is even going to come till we got there on the day and framed it up. So it's one of those things you weren't going to figure out till you were actually making it.
How different is that to when you make previous films?
Well, previous films, you kind of know, no matter where the car is, I can use a camera lens to get me closer. I can always zoom in on the thing. There's no zoom on this. So you kind of had to go, we're not really going to know if we can even do some of these shots till we get there. So we did a test day where we just tested out the most, and I did that in Sin City and other movies that were going to be kind of groundbreaking, is just have a day where you test all the most difficult shots, just really quickly. Just so you can kind of wrap your head around it. And right away you could see that it was going to work. And even the guys were there going like, oh my God, this is really working.
When we were doing that tracking shot, running down the hallway?
All that stuff was just really, made you realize that the medium was exciting, and it was a new way of telling a story, because it's more immersive if you do it the right way than traditional filmmaking. I mean, it feels like it's riveting, you know, to watch. And so it's for me, it was an exciting discovery to see that there's another way to tell stories that could be even more engaging than traditional filmmaking.
And you guys mentioned in the presentation earlier there was a content problem with VR. There wasn't enough people like Robert to do this. Talk about how you persuaded people like Robert and some of the other filmmakers you're working with to essentially eradicate that content problem.
Well, I think I sort of divide people in the world. This is personal and in business, right? I think there's people in the world, we were talking about this, that sort of need to see it before they believe it. And then there's other people that are willing to take that leap. And I think Robert has been doing this his entire career, right? Doing things that have never been done. And I think we sit with filmmakers all day long, we sit with on-camera actors, and you can very quickly devise what side they fall into. And so with Robert, I think you just, anytime sort of someone says you can't do it or there's a challenge, you stand up and you're like, well, I'm going to do it. And I think, you know, there's less people in that bucket. And I think the people who end up, you know, taking those big risks, a lot of time it ends up paying off.
I just always found great reward in going in early on something, because people don't know what can be done with it yet. And so you're in the very early stages of, you get to really be innovative because no one's had a chance to really touch those tools. And then you get to really help push where those tools are headed. So a lot of the innovations that happen in digital cinema and 3D were because I had adopted that early. So I got to be on the forefront of that.
A lot of people are scared, right? A lot of people don't want to sort of put themselves out there, right? They've spent decades.
Yeah, that's the whole thing, is let's wait till the next version comes out. Well, the next version isn't going to come out till there's more content. So if you're waiting for the next version, well, who's going to create the content to get you there? So you need those people to kind of go out and pioneer and be innovative and try it and push like we said early on, it's where the title even came from. We really want to push the limit of what this thing can do.
And talk about how audiences are going to watch it. Talk about the strategy behind launching the channel.
Well, I think for us, we are creating a new category in VR. There's nothing that is, premium, star-driven live action. And so for us, the distribution piece is really important. And so because there are no existing platforms that really support this type of content, especially with our format, we are building an app to help get it out there. And we are thinking about monetizing the content. We cannot build a sustainable ecosystem in VR with world-class filmmakers and talent unless we create an economy, right? And so being able to really be in more control of what that consumer experience is start to finish is something that we thought we really needed to be part of. I think the hope is that we will help jumpstart this thing and that other distributors and media companies sort of see the potential and sort of come on board with either their own apps that can support this, or in other ways to really help push things forward. But what I think as an industry we cannot continue to just put out free content experiences that are essentially marketing for TV shows and movies, right? Like we have to create native, original VR content that is premium and that is star-driven.
And the tech keeps getting better and better and better. And I think for us, and we've been surprised, because it's taken a while to sort of put our whole plan into place, is that the content's still kind of in the same exact zone. And I think we're in this dangerous place where the technology is outpacing the delivery of the kinds of content that's actually going to get people excited about buying these things, right? And so
it's already outdated once someone starts to make something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think there's plenty of headsets out there. Now it's time to make, and there'll be more, right? But now it's time to make some content that kicks ass. And you put on a headset, you don't recognize any filmmakers, you don't recognize any on-screen talent, and now you're going to put on a headset and you're going to see Michelle Rodriguez, written, directed by these guys. You're going to like, okay, well, I'm going to lean in. I want to know what that's about, right? And so I think that's hopefully going to start the flow.
And you're part of a bigger film and TV company. How are you viewed internally, and does it help the fact that you're part of an existing traditional business?
Yeah, I mean, it helps in a lot of ways. I think, Andy and I had started a company independently, and we came into STX. I think the level of infrastructure and support that we get there is tremendously helpful. And I think the most important thing, though, is really just like the funnel of incredible talent that we can now meet with and talk to, right? Like we only met Robert through STX, and so being able to just have the opportunity to work with talent within the STX ecosystem that are doing other things at the company, making movies and TV shows, and like being able to sort of work with them on the VR side. What we find is, like Andy said, like you have a meeting and you surmise pretty quickly if there's interest in sort of being involved in innovative content. And I think from there, if there's interest, like we just have the ability, because the company is still small, to really just move fast and get things going. I mean, even meeting with Robert early on, we were like, how quickly can we get started on something? And luckily, Robert and his team move fast too. Yeah. But I think it's important to not just, it can't have the same life cycle of like a traditional film development process, because, you're waiting 18 months, and by then the technology has changed, and like you have to sort of rethink everything like ground up.
Yeah, and that's where the traditional process, and you guys know this so well, is you look at the timeline of someone pitching an idea, or you meet with a director and a writer, and they have an idea, and then you have to do the deal, and then the agency goes back and forth with the studio, and then all of a sudden 4 months have passed, and then you have to put all the other pieces together, right? I think for us, we don't come from the traditional studio system, so it's never going to move fast enough for us. We're always going to be the ones sort of pushing, and I think when we have filmmakers and creators like Racer and Robert, that's how we're going to win, right? Because if we're pushing and you guys are pushing, then I don't think anyone is ever really going to be able to stop us.
How long did it take to make?
We wrote it, it took us probably like a week or so to write it, and then we shot it in about 4 or 5 days.
Right.
And then it cut it over a weekend because it was all wide shots, so it was hard to cut. I mean, you're really exciting when you go to edit it, because I have my editing machine there at home, and it's like, wait, don't I need a VR helmet to edit? But it didn't, my machine, the Avid, doesn't work with a VR helmet, so I had to edit it kind of stretched out, flat and warped, more than that, warped out. I would edit it by memory, send it to Racer in a file. He would watch it in VR, send me back notes. I would adjust it. Okay, now you really know you're in the forefront of doing something when you don't have the technology to even edit the thing. So it was pretty exciting to play with it.
And was the budget anywhere comparable to anything you'd worked on?
Yeah, I mean, I've done all kinds of movies. I've done $7,000 features.
I was going to say, are we talking $7,000 or
I just did another one
numbers?
a few months ago, another $7,000 movie, feature film. But no, it was a great budget for being able to do everything that we needed to have a support team and a crew. You know, we had a bit of a smaller crew because mainly the camera sees so wide that you don't want a bunch of trucks and things that you have to just keep moving around. So the more stripped down the crew, the easier it could be. But put all the money on the screen so that it would just feel like you're in a legitimate, full-blown Michelle Rodriguez action flick.
Have you spoken to Michelle about her role on it? I wonder how she felt as making it in you know, it being a slightly different process.
She loved it. She's the one who had the idea when I first came up with, hey, let's do something in VR. She wrote me back, 'cause she's a writer. She wrote me back a few days later and said, let's do something where the viewer is jumping out of a plane with me. They're in an urban warfare situation. They're in this kind of situation, one action scenario after another. And so I wrote a character and for her back for some other project. I took that and then we came up with something, knowing Michelle, that we could craft that would just be a legitimate character that she could play in a series of films, TV, anything that really fit her like a glove. And Racer and I both worked on that to find a character, because you kind of need a character to draw you into this world. You're not going to just put on the helmet just to watch stuff. You're going to want to watch a character that you want to follow, and that you could follow that character into any medium. So let's come up with that. Let's come up with a character that really fits her, something that is a franchise, that feels like a franchise.
It's not a one-off. You can see this.
You could totally see it being more, even if it is a one-off. You kind of want that. The viewer wants that story value, that they can imagine other adventures with this character. Come up with that strong of a concept, and yet now let's put it in VR in a way that works better in VR to watch this particular story than if you were to shoot a film. Let's do a story that works best in VR. So that's the trick, is taking that sort of, and coming up with that and giving her just a character that's totally charming, totally exciting, and kick-ass, and that the audience would love to participate in and be a part of.
Are you going to do more in VR?
We'd love to. We've got all kinds of ideas now. Now that we know, even for just the cinematic VR, what the beast is. Now we know what it is, and now we really can go and create more content, because it's very fun. Yeah,
what did you learn that you sort of go, actually now we've done it once, we can sort of see what our next projects can be?
We could kind of see it right when we're on the set. When these guys came down too, everyone was watching the set, and they could see that when you were in the POV of another character, working and being a character alongside someone like Michelle, it was shockingly absorbing. That was really exciting. We were all like, holy shit, this really works. So you could see yourself doing more things because you saw it. You could see it right there, even on the set, that it was working, and it was different than movies. It's not like you can just go back to just traditional movies only. This VR has something to it that that's additive, that you can't get in a movie experience. So that makes it different. It's not like sometimes you would see things done for VR that felt like, well, why am I even watching this in VR? I'd rather watch it in TV or film. Well, I can barely see, I can barely hear. But when it's part of the limitations are actually part of the story, it actually can draw you in more.
And that was really, our intent in working with Robert was that we would be able to do multiple projects, right? Because I think we knew that just in going through, having the experience of making one, that we would collectively learn so much. And so to be able to use all of that to do a second and a third, right? Like we would be able to elevate that. And so, and for us, because we are launching a channel, we are thinking about a volume of content. So I think we're really excited to be able to, pursue other projects.
Yeah, and also you've announced other projects, working with other filmmakers on a recent slate that included a whole bunch of other filmmakers, right?
That's right.
Yeah. How much would you like to make in a year? I mean, give us an idea of, in terms of volume of content.
Well, I think in year one, we need to find that balance where you're launching a channel, right? You can't have two things on there that's not a channel. That doesn't sort of count. So I think we're looking at 6 to 8 in the first 12 months from launch. And then then it gets really interesting, right? Because we can start to see viewing habits. We understand what people are responding to. We understand what people aren't responding to, not only from a storytelling perspective, but like also from a categorical standpoint, right? Because I think the way we talked about it early on is, okay, well, what is the HBO of VR? If we go back to like 1988, when HBO was first starting to get into original content, and you know, they could do comedy, right? They could do drama, they could do sci-fi, they could do sort of any genre, and there was the through line between all of that. I think the goal for us is across these 6 or 8 in year one, we sort of make these bets across the spectrum, and then we start to iterate.
And it creates a habit for the viewer to be able to just look continually towards new content coming out, so that they are, you know, constantly being fed that content, because they have the gear. They just need more content.
And you don't want it to be a niche experience. You want this to be something that, you know, becomes much bigger than it is at the moment.
Our whole, and we talked about it in the beginning of this panel, we need to take this into mainstream. I think VR has the potential, right? I think you talk about it, this is an additive thing, right? It's not just taking a movie or a TV show and putting something in front of it and augmenting it. This is its own new format. Rick and I were in short form digital early on, and we always talked about, you know, film's film, TV's TV, short form digital, just like theater's theater. And so I think VR is its own thing, and we're trying to sort of put it on a pedestal and shine a bunch of lights on.
Robert, can you take any of your traditional films and turn them into VR? Is there extensions to move some of your bigger franchises into this space?
I mean, you would create something new, you mean? Yeah, to take the characters and stories. Yeah, there's ways to take existing ideas and characters and storylines that people like and put them in a new way of experiencing them, where you feel like you're inside of it.
Yeah. And Racer, how was it working with your dad? Did it live up to the computer game experience from the start?
Oh, I love working with my dad. I've been working with him for a long time, and every time the process is great, especially, but more so on this, because whereas on film I learned so much from him on film, this was an experience where both of us were learning a lot. So it was great for both of us to be there with something we created and figuring out how to make it really great.
And Racer, you know, Racer's the one who we're making this for, right? I think we're the old
great.
guys.
He's the audience as well. So you know, when we get him excited about it, we're like, okay, now we're doing well. That's our audience. They're very particular.
Have you shown it to your friends yet? Have you shown it to some millennials? Have you shown it?
Not yet. We're still working on it.
Well, his younger brother Rebel saw it, and he was like backing up, but he has the headset on because it really makes you feel like you're in it.
Good. Well, I hope you do some more. I'm sure there's plenty more to come.
Yeah.
Can we thank these guys for their time?
Let's do it.